that's what I thought.
Welcome everyone to tonight's council meeting for Monday the 12th of October 2020. Can we please stand for the opening prayer and acknowledgement of custodians of the land. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision making, protect us in the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. I must now inform you that this council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting, you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. Albury City accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations, I've not been made aware of any. Mr. Zachnich, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. This advice relates to disclosure of political donations and the requirements of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. The Act under Section 10.4 requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. The reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Accordingly, the provisions of Section 4.151 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report, detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contributions plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 9.3 of Part 9 of that Act. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Zachnich. Okay, apologies. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the council receive notes and accept the apology of Councillor Khan and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All those in favour? Includes Councillor Cameron and Councillor Sutchbury on Zoom. Thank you. The motion is carried. Okay, Merrill minute, there isn't. Action plans. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley, your light's on.
Oh, I'm happy to move, Mr. Mayor, that the following action plans be received and noted. Actions complete for noting only. Actions awaiting response from external parties. Actions in progress and long-term issues more than 3 months.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, just to speak to that or
No,
not?
thank you, Mr. Mayor.
There being no further question or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? That includes Councillor Cameron and Councillor Sutchbury. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting held on Monday, the 28th of September. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that the following recommendations, the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, 28 September 2020 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to second.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
There being no further question or debate, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? That includes Councillor Cameron and Councillor Sutchbury. The motion is carried. Thank you. There are no reports from community forums. There are no notices of motion or rescission. No presentations and deputations. CM11, there are no reports, minutes of committees and working parties. There are no documents for sealing. CM12. Officers' reports for consideration 13.1 development application 10.2020.3757.2.1 Medical Centre 714 Young Street. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Council A receives and notes the contents of this report. B, grants development consent to development application 10.2020.37572.1, proposing the demolition of an existing dwelling and construction of a medical centre on the subject site described as Lot 1 of DP 937653, known as 714 Young Street, Albury, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included as attachment 5 to this report. And I've added a part C that was not in the agenda recommendation, which is to undertake an investigation regarding whether it's appropriate to implement time-limited parking along Young Street in the vicinity of this development. The area of investigation should be bounded by Guinea Street to the south and North Street to the north, and make recommendations regarding individual street blocks. This matter should be reported back to the local traffic committee for consideration following the investigation.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman. Councillor Vanderman.
No, I'm not seconding that. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Khan, did you wish to open debate? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, this development is at the commercial fringe of the Albury CBD. It's the edge of commercial properties entering into what was previously residential area and is still zoned residential. This sort of application is always going to be difficult or frustrating for nearby residents who may not have anticipated this change when they purchased their properties decades ago. So we have received a number of objections to this DA. It is my personal view that this is an appropriate business to be at the edge of the commercial fringe in a residential area. It's not a pub, it's not a 24-hour facility, it's a medical centre. It's proposed to be relatively quiet with appropriate hours for a business located in a residential area. We did get several objections with fairly consistent concerns about traffic, and particularly lots of comments about whether or not the employees of the business would actually use the rear car park provided. Now, obviously, that's not directly within the control of council or of the developer, but noting that in commercial areas of the CBD, we have timed on-street parking so that employees that require all-day parking don't park on the street. I think it's worth considering applying that sort of approach to this section of Young Street, where the area is gradually changing from residential to commercial. And I think that may address some of the concerns that were raised by the neighbours with regards to employees parking on the street all day. That was the purpose behind the part C, which I've added, but noting that that change wouldn't be made tonight. It would simply be reported to the local traffic committee. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Thank you very much, Councillor Khan. Speaker against, Councillor Vanderman.
I only speak against this on the basis that I don't think we need an item C, and I foreshadow that should this be lost, that the original motion without item C, I would then move. So I don't have an issue with A and B. I just think that C is not necessary. It is. There's a lot of businesses already in Young Street, and I would suggest there's at least a dozen businesses in Young Street, and they've not had any issues with parking, and this one I don't see any difference in terms of parking in that vicinity having to be timed. There are other areas, however, in the CBD that could do with timed parking, but I think that's the purview of the council staff in doing and continuing to look at our car parking strategy. So as part of my speaking against, can I ask a question, Mr Mayor, to relevant member of staff?
Certainly.
As where are we at with our car parking strategy? I believe it's just been completed. Was that part of any determination in terms of Young Street having to be timed parking?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor. The parking strategy has been endorsed by council in recent months. I think it was in August. It outlines some of the rationale for time-limited parking. So if the current motion on the board is approved, council staff in the initial instance would undertake a parking utilisation study just of the area that would then determine if it warranted any further investigation from a time-limited parking point of view.
Thank you. So continuing on that sort of justifies my position here, is that we've just finished a total car parking review of the city. And in terms of Councillor Khan indicating that people might not use the car park that's provided for the employees, I beg to differ, because if the owner of the business has any brains or business brains whatsoever, they would be forcing their employees to use the car park and leave the car parking out the front for potential customers. And that's something that this city has been very clear on over the last 15 or 16 years that I've been involved, in terms of getting employers to encourage their employees to park away from the CBD so that their customers have ready access to their businesses. So in terms of both of those issues, that we've just completed the car parking strategy, and that I believe that the owners of this business will basically force their employers to use the car parking that's going to be provided by the employer. I believe that item C is totally unnecessary.
Thank you. Speaker for Councillor Stutchbury, did you have your hand up? Yep.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do speak for this amended motion. When I was reading the report, I was pretty much in favour of the DA, and I agree with Councillor Khan that it's an appropriate sort of business to place on the fringe of the CBD. I was concerned about the car parking issue, and I think that this proposed amendment by Councillor Khan will cover off that nicely. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the car parking strategy document that we've just looked at was really only focused on the CBD and not on the outer regions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. There are no further speakers against. Councillor Doxey speaking for.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On this motion, I speak in favour of the motion, and I do not agree with Councillor Van der Ven's assumptions that there is no need for a paragraph C. We're not making a decision based upon purely about the restriction of hours. That's a matter that will come to the local traffic committee for consideration, which I think is appropriate. I will support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. No speakers against. Speaker for, Councillor Thurley.
Just very quickly, Mr. Mayor, since what I want to support the motion, then what I mostly want to say has been covered. We perhaps also need to look, as part of that investigation we've done, and to see where the local residents can get a permit that does not cause them to have to move and use timed parking. This is done in lots of other places. The residents were concerned about parking, and it's understandable. I've driven up and down that part of the city many times, and sometimes there's lots of difficulty. But this would take into account their concerns and would address it by a quantitative assessment of what's going on. At the moment, we don't have that quantitative assessment. This would do it. I do have one question that I'd like to ask. It was about condition F5, which is about external lighting, and it talked about not light straying into neighbouring properties. I'd like to suggest once again that we simply require compliance with AS 4282, which is control of the obtrusive effects of outdoor lighting, and we should do that on any development, and not use vague words like light spilling and straying into external properties. AS 4282 is quite clear about the types of lighting, about its location, whether it can point upwards, downwards, shrouding and all that sort of stuff. So I'd really like to recommend to council that in most of these developments where lighting is an issue, we should just use 4282 and require the developer to comply with that standard. Thank you, and I support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There being no further speakers for or against, happy for you to close, Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't repeat my comments on part A and B, but since there's been a speaker against part C, This is a DA that's caused some angst amongst the neighbouring properties. Some of those concerns have already been taken into account, such as a request for an increased fence height. Some of those requests can't be taken into account by council because they related to things that are outside of our control, and some of them related to traffic, which is within our control to address and hasn't been yet addressed. So if this is something that may be acceptable to the residents that may ameliorate some of their concerns to do with traffic around this new development, then I think it's something we should do. We did approve the car parking strategy earlier this year, but this is a new development, and the fellow residents of Young Street are convinced that this development will have a significant impact on traffic and parking in their street. If they're correct, then it's worth re-investigating. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Happy to put the motion as a division. All those in favour? Councillor Doxey, Councillor King, Councillor Mack, Councillor Khan, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Stutchby. Those against? Councillor Cameron and Councillor Van der Ven. The motion is carried. Thank you. CM 13.2, Development Application 10.2020.37349.1, Place of Public Worship at 4 Shepherd Court and 240 Kerr Road. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receives the contents of this report and B refuses to grant consent to development application 10.2020.37349.1 for a boundary adjustment, construction of a place of public worship, car park, landscaping and fencing for the following reasons contained in the draft determination included at attachment 7 to the report. 1, the development does not meet the objectives and detail and controls of Part 10. I'll turn around and read the other screen. 10.4 of Albury Development Control Plan 2010 in regard to large-scale non-residential uses in residential zones, and is therefore contrary to the provisions of section 4.15 bracket 1 bracket A bracket 3 of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. 2, the development will create adverse impacts upon adjacent residential allotments through noise generation and will have adverse visual impacts to the surrounding locality and is therefore contrary to the provisions of section 415(1)(b) of the Environmental Planning Assessment Act 1979. 3, owing to the adverse impacts to the surrounding residential areas, the site is not considered to be suitable for the proposed use and development, is therefore contrary to the provisions of section 415(1)(c) of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. And 4, the development would have an adverse impact upon current and future residents of Shepherd Court and Guy Place, which is not in the public interest and is therefore contrary to section 415(1)(e) of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor Van der Ven.
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that at all?
Yes, certainly, Mr Mayor. This is the second or third time we've considered this matter, and there has been some changes made by the developer, but in essence they do not address the major issues, which are high fences completely out of character with the local developments. They have assumed that no other property will be built above a single story, which is not in their permit to do. And if a second story building was built, say, in Guy Place, the effects of this development would be significant because no 2 metre high fence will solve any problem about noise. Noise is a critical issue, and I'd have to say I was not impressed with the assessment of what noise will be caused by this development. We the report considered the effect of motor engines running and quietly traversing a driveway and traffic in the background and so on. It did not take into account adequately, in my opinion, impact noise, closing of car doors, cars that make an alarm when the doors are locked, a high-pitched beeping noise. They have tried to solve one problem by going back to an 8:15 start, but 8:15 on a winter's morning is not an appropriate time to be roused from your sleep in your bed by car doors slamming, people talking and car alarms going off. So I don't think that they've addressed the significant issues, and it has these issues that are all talked about in the draft determination And I just don't believe it can fit into a quiet suburban cul-de-sac in a sort of a semi-rural setting. So I'm totally opposed to the development.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. There appears to be no further speakers for or against. Councillor Thurley, did you wish to close debate?
No, that'll do.
Okay, happy to put the motion as a division. All those in favour? Councillor Doxey, Councillor King, Councillor Mack, Councillor Khan, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor Stutchbury and Councillor Cameron. Is that you with your 4? Yes, thank you. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Okay, 13.3, which is the nominations for voting delegates to the 2020 Local Government New South Wales Annual Conference. Councillor Vanderman.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I move that council nominates 2 councillors to act as additional voting delegates at the 2020 Local Government New South Wales Annual Conference.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. It would appear that the screen recommendation is different to what we've got on our papers, and I prefer what we've got in our papers, but do we wish to go with the one that's on the screen, do you think? Can we, I would suggest C nominates 2 councillors to attend and participate, and then we'll do the vote. That would be my suggestion, but that's what we've got up on the screen.
So you're accepting my motion, or you want it?
No, I think we
Reworded
need
to
to
that
stick
one.
with the recommendation on the screen, but
Okay, so
if we
these
can
papers are
modify
out of
to
date?
nominate 2 councillors, Councillor Vanderman, that would make it a lot easier because we can't do one and the other at the same
Well,
time.
forget what I just said.
Okay.
Can I
no worries.
move the following,
Forgotten.
Mr Mayor, that Council A endorses the registration of the Mayor and Deputy Mayor to attend and participate as voting delegates to the 2020 Local Government New South Wales Annual Conference. B, determines 2 councillors to act as additional voting delegates to the 2020 Local Government New South Wales Annual Conference, and nominates the following councillors to attend and participate as voting delegates to the 2020 Local Government New South Wales Annual Conference. 1, Councillor.
That's where it becomes a bit sticky. That's what I'm saying. It probably should be out without C, but anyway, happy to accept that as a part motion, and I will just accept it as part of the motion, and we'll continue on with the voting after this.
Okay.
We move the motion. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second as we've gotten so far, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. So I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Now I'm happy to take nominations for the 2 voting positions. Councillor Doxey.
Councillor Alice Glacken.
Councillor Glacken. Any other nominations for the 2 voting positions? Am I seeing anyone else wishing to attend? Councillor Vanderman? Yeah. Okay, happy to accept Councillor Glacken and Councillor Vanderman as the 2 nominated councillors. Is there any further discussion? Doesn't appear to be. So we'll put them down as the voting delegates, Councillor Glacken and Councillor Vanderman. I don't think there's a real reason to recommit the motion, is there? Thank you, Mr. Zachnich. Okay, congratulations, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so, yeah, we've put the motion. We've identified the 2 nominated people. Happy as Larry. Okay, so Officers' reports for noting. 14.1, disclosures by Council's Audit and Risk and Improvement Committee members and designated persons returned 2019-21. Councillor Vanderman.
Move that Council receives a notice of report concerning the 2019-2020 disclosure of returns by councillors, Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee members and designated persons.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, would you to speak to that?
No, it's there on the table for everybody to look at.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried, including Councillor Cameron and Councillor Stutchbury. Okay, 14.2, draft graffiti management plan 2021-2025. Thank you, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receives and notes the draft graffiti management plan 2021-2025 report.
Yep, looking for a seconder. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak to that at all?
Briefly, it's certainly something we need. It's horrible to read the report that between 2010 and 2015 we spent nearly $500,000 removing graffiti, and between 2016 and 2020 another $531,000. We apparently have one person who's charged with an offence, apparently awaiting trial in October this year. We we really need this plan to be developed and pushed hard. And I've provided staff with some material I received from 2 conferences I went to very early in my term as a councillor, I think 2014 and 2015. And I would encourage staff to look outside at other organisations and what success they've had and how they achieved that success. It's a difficult problem. And when you've got other players in the game, and here I'm talking about ARTC and Transport for New South Wales, who don't seem to be committed enough to this plan. When one property gets graffitied, there's a roll-on effect. If you got away with it there, you get away with it somewhere else. And while we've got a lot of great things happening with street art and a lot of wonderful young people doing great things in our city, we've still got this problem. So we need to use every possible means at our disposal. And so here we have a program to develop a graffiti management strategy. And I thoroughly support what is there. I want it to go hard. We need really to look at this as a significant problem for the city. If in 4 years it's cost us nearly $500,000, this is wasted ratepayers' money. And we need to find ways to get ratepayers on board. We need to get people who know what's happening and see what's happening to tell us what's happening. Too many people shut their eyes. I used to regularly walk my dogs across Norris Park Oval, and I would come down and find tyre tracks and the whole place torn up. There are at least 15 houses that border, and no one saw anything or no one rang the police. We really have to get better at looking after our own neighbourhoods and calling out those who wish to destroy it or vandalise it. And so I really want to see every means at our disposal used to tackle this problem. One of the issues that was used and it was talked about in one of the conferences I went was the use of technology that can sniff aerosol paint and immediately raise an alarm. So it's like having CCTV footage, but it's not. It simply smells the paint and sends an alarm back to a security company or back to the police. And you put one of these things in some of the hotspots, they're tiny little devices, and you may have a chance of catching people. And catching people in the end is the biggest deterrent of all. So I commend the report and commend our staff, and I'm just suggesting that they really go hard for this one and seek out those who've succeeded and how they did it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Appears to be no speakers against. Speaker for, Councillor Vanderman.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I briefly glimpsed an email that you sent in relation to this subject, but I didn't have a chance to read it. Are you able to provide some background as to what your email, you were suggesting something in terms of graffiti management?
Well,
I just want to get a brief idea of what you were trying to tell us in that email, because I didn't have a chance to read it.
No, that's no problem. And I was going to mention it in debate, but that's fine. I made the point that to 14-15, we viewed a graffiti management strategy. We operated on the back of that strategy and cleaned out and engaged all the partners, had a number of meetings with Transport for New South Wales, Justice, Police, ARTC and Origin Energy. The list was endless, and they all committed to a point of cleaning up their mess and maintaining their mess. We also employed a organisation called Graffiti Buses, I believe their name was, from Melbourne, to clean down our assets. And that was done with the purpose of actually employing the company that Councillor Thurley has mentioned to provide an audit of our assets and monitor those assets from that point forward. That didn't happen. And unfortunately, I think as Councillor Thurley has indicated, we need to go hard on this. And certainly, I don't see detection as a necessarily solution. I see it as a way of supporting the young people, the people that are committing these crimes, because essentially unsupported, they'll continue to commit these crimes, and their energy can be devoted to quality street art, which there's evidence in some of the people we now employ to do that street art. So for what they do now, they get paid, and it's a good outcome. So,
Yeah.
you know, I think that's what that was about, Councillor Vanderman. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I couldn't agree more with Councillor Thurley. It's a blight on our community, this graffiti. I was just horrified the other day when there was an announcement about the new V-line trains, and they're going to build a graffiti-proof shed for how many $1 million, so that the graffiti artists can't get to it. I just think that that's a really sad place for us to be in when we have to spend that sort of money to protect public assets from the impacts of graffiti artists. So yes, it's a complex issue, as the conclusion in the item says, but we either need to do two things really well. One is to try to identify the perpetrators and see whether we can help them at all to divert them from their harmful activity to something that's a little bit more community minded and community spirited. But if they're not prepared to change their ways, we need to pursue them and prosecute them to the full extent of the law. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Van. Question, Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The relevant member of staff. I'm having difficulty bringing up the report, but 4 years ago we did a bus tour around Albury when we first got onto council, and I pointed out the Westpac Bank in Lavington. It's a 2-storey or 3-storey building, and it's got graffiti in Urana Road. I drove past it from the tip the other day, and it's still there. So what powers do the council rangers and enforcement people have to direct landlords to clean graffiti off?
Happy to take it.
Ms. Squire?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the question, Councillor King. We don't currently have powers to force private property owners to remove graffiti. That is one of the recommendations that's been made in regards to the amendments that are currently being considered with regard to the Graffiti Control Act. If that were in place, we would then be in a position to actually issue a notice to a landowner, give them 14 days to remove the graffiti and have things tidied up. And I guess aligned with that is the fact that council can remove graffiti from private property, but only if we're able to access that property on public land. So there's some restrictions around when we can actually go on to private property and remove graffiti if the owners don't do it. But hopefully, as I said, and as is identified in the report, that Act is currently under review. We're hoping that there'll be outcomes from that review toward the end of this year. And certainly the recommendation in regards to local government having power to force private landowners to remove graffiti is in the submission that we supported that was made by Local Government New South Wales and the Crime Prevention and Safety Network that we're involved in.
Yeah, can you just elaborate a bit about the council staff being able to remove it from a private building, but having access from public space? So can you tell me how that works?
Yep.
Do you need permission from the person who owns the building for us to clean it off?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thanks for the question, Councillor King. So we can seek approval from the owner to remove the graffiti. If the owner won't grant consent, then we can only request, or we can only remove it if it's visible to the public, and we can actually physically stand on public land to remove the graffiti. So there's quite a lot of controls in the Act around what we can and can't do. Obviously, if the owner does consent to the removal, and depending on the nature of the building and all those other issues, then we can work with them and do it potentially by agreement.
One more. So let's use the Westpac Bank in Lavington as a prime example. If you got permission from the building owner next door to the Westpac Bank to go and clean that graffiti off, can you go onto private land if you have the permission, or private building rooftop permission of the neighbour to clean the building that has the graffiti that is visible from the street?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I believe so. I believe that provided that we've got owner's consent, but as you've outlined, if we need to access someone else's property to do that, we'd really need to look at the specifics, but I'm happy to take that on notice with regard to that particular property and come back to you.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey, question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I understand where Councillor King's coming from. My question would be, where does council stand then if we do any damage to that particular property?
Through you, Mr Mayor, if we do any damage through removing the graffiti, then we are responsible for the remediation of that, which is often why our activities are dependent on the specifics of the property. Yeah. And the nature of the graffiti itself. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Squire. No, no one else? Okay, just to finish up on, I was going to speak to this motion and just to give a more holistic view of the process is that if we're not proactive and not encouraging our businesses and our private owners of homes or businesses to report graffiti and to remove it, and we are actually, the $500,000 that we talk about is on council assets, not on public assets. So there's a lot of graffiti on public assets in this city. And essentially our role is to be proactive, but to encourage the community to come along on the journey. And that includes our business community, which we certainly could do through our Northside Chamber. Secondly, if we don't report it and we don't audit and take photos of it, which is part of the previous campaign, the police then don't record a report. And then the circle is that if they don't record a report, when we apply for funding for graffiti management or anything else in relation to this space, we don't have the numbers or the support to do it. Secondly, the police have no incentive then to actually task the police to actually target this particular behaviour as malicious damage. So there's a whole circular economy, and I get the whole notion of deterrent and I get the whole notion of apprehension, but as I said before, the apprehension of the person committing the crime is about rehabilitation and supporting that person and anyone in their circle to be able to understand why they do it and provide, as Councillor Thurley indicated, a more positive outlet and pursuit for their actions. So that was my reasoning behind actually ramping this up, and hopefully we'll get some responses from the ARTC and Transport for New South Wales, because the freeway has significant damage all along the stanchions, and certainly so does the ARTC. So anyway, I'm happy to put the motion. Did you want to close debate, Councillor Thurley?
Just to reinforce your point that while detection and apprehension and punishment are certainly things that need to happen, a better result is if we can get these people to use their talents. And there are, as you have said, some wonderful examples of beautiful artwork. The Logan Road Dog Park is one. There's an old shed on the football club ground, and the back of it was constantly painted. Now it's got a beautiful mural of a dog, and it's absolutely fantastic. So if we can get the message across that we want you to do art in this city and we'll pay you to do it, but don't do this other stuff, I think that's a great message.
Thank you. Okay, happy to put the motion. All those in favour, including Councillor Touchy, Councillor Cameron, the motion is carried. Okay, we have no delegates reports for noting. Yep, no delegates reports for noting. And one urgent business item that I have in front of me that was brought to my attention was Councillor Khan was nominated for the Minister's Awards for Women in Local Government and received acknowledgement of that nomination from the Local Government Minister Hancock. Congratulations, Councillor Khan. To be acknowledged is fantastic. And is there any other urgent business? Councillor Doxey, did you have some urgent business?
Mr Mayor, very, very quickly, dog attacks. What are we doing about them? And dogs off leads.
Dog attacks. They're looking at each other. Ms Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'm not sure if there's a specific incidents that you're talking about. Certainly we've got a number of education programs that we're running through the community. And I guess as part of that, you know, we've just re-rolled out the keep up with your best mate program, where we used to actually encourage people to come into the park. We'd have a major event. We'd microchip animals and pets. We haven't been able to do that with COVID, so we've actually been doing that by a booking service. One of our rangers, I think, did 20 visits to residential properties on Friday to microchip their pets, take them through the education program, and share information about what other support and services were available to help them manage their pets. So education is key. Obviously, when incidents do arise, we respond to those immediately. But really it is about educating people as to how to take care of their pets and make sure that they keep people safe when they are out in the community, and they keep their dogs on a leash when they're not in an off-leash area. And obviously if they're a dog that's not social and able to, you know, communicate and play with other dogs, then they probably shouldn't be taking them to off-leash areas either. But really it is about education. But if there's a specific case, Councillor Doxey, I'm happy to talk to you outside of the meeting and follow up.
I acknowledge that and I thank you for that. We need to start looking at some public prosecutions.
Yep, thank you. I just want to finish on the fact that we are doing door-to-doors with the tagging. I think that's a credit to the staff, because it is a difficult task, especially if you're going into places where you don't know what's beyond the door. Okay, no further urgent business. Happy to close the meeting at 6:41. Thank you.